you all probably have people who've made an impact on you as they've led as well. Some good impact, some not so good impact. Not long ago, I was having a conversation with Brian Burgess. Brian is the chairman of our deacon body, and we were talking about some issues related to the ordination that's getting ready to come up in a week. And as we talked about leadership, and Brian has had some just unique opportunities in leadership. And as we talked a little bit, I thought, man, it'd be great for our people to hear from Brian on this topic. So take a moment and let's listen to Brian and what some of his leadership experiences. Brian, thanks for taking some time today and joining me as we're going to talk a little bit about leadership. You serve as our chairman of deacons right now, but you and your family have been at Celebration a while. Tell me how long y'all have been at Celebration and what some of your involvements have been up to now.
10 years. We've been here for a decade now. Raised a couple of young men now who were raised in the church, and then I've got a couple of little ones coming up through. So this church has been the center of our social life for the last decade.
You have had a lot of different exposures to leadership over your lifetime as an adult. You were in the military, and we're thinking about that because Veterans Day is coming up. But you were in the military, you served in the governor's office for a season, and now leading in a church. Tell me a little bit about your leadership experiences and observations in the military.
Yeah, United States Army. I was in the early 90s, just after the Cold War. And it was a time where I was an enlisted man, and I was in communications, so I worked directly with the commander. I actually had a sharp contrast in leadership styles between a guy that was very difficult to work for and a guy that I respected greatly. And I was in Korea for about a year and a half, and about half that time, I had a platoon sergeant who liked to lead with ridicule and just some things that were just made it very painful for everybody, not just me, but he led by fear and that kind of thing, and it was not a pleasant experience. I was actually miserable, and a new officer came to take over the unit, and lo and behold, this was a guy that I had driven for at Fort Hood, Texas, and it was a sea change in leadership for me. This is a guy that you'd walk over hot coals for. You looked up to him because he inspired you. He wasn't afraid to do things himself, and he could get angry, but he'd also bring you alongside him and show you what it was that was frustrating him, and he'd troubleshoot it with you and figure things out. And of course, he was also, lo and behold, a Christian, believe it or not. So I just really admired him, and it was one of those experiences. I looked up to him. I couldn't thank God enough when he arrived in Korea to become my commander.
You wind up in the governor's office after, when you all came to Tallahassee. You served in Rick Scott's administration. What did you learn about effective leadership in that environment?
Yeah, that was in the spotlight, right? You're in a huge, in a pressure cooking environment, and it was a spotlight situation where anything you did and said was magnified. I learned a lot about how to sort of hold my tongue. What I learned working for the governor was that he was the type of guy that didn't get hung up on yesterday's troubles and yesterday's things. So he was a forward-looking guy. Again, another inspirational type of person to work for, and I really enjoyed that time.
You've wind up engaged in church leadership. When you think about passages of scripture like Titus 1 that talk to us about just how important integrity, how important graciousness, and those kinds of qualities are in leaders, how do you see that working in the church or in other contexts where you've experienced leadership?
Right. Well, leadership obviously is critical. You have to have someone who understands what the mission is, who agrees with that mission, and then can kind of figure out where can they apply those strengths. But the other part about leadership is actually recruiting and training up other people to do that job. And we train them up, we equip them, we try to lead by example.
How important then is it that leaders in the church have an extraordinary measure of integrity, and why is it important that the standards for church leaders aren't the same as they would be for maybe other members of the church?
You can go back to the time in the governor's office where, again, you're in a spotlight situation. It's a similar situation in church leadership where everybody is looking at you, not just other Christians in the church, but people outside the church who are judging what this church is all about. They may be considering whether they want to come in and join that church. Who is leading that church? Do they live by biblical standards? Do they carry themselves outside of the church in the way they claim to live inside the church?
We got a group of men who are getting ready to come on board as active deacons. They're brand new. They're going to be ordained next weekend.
Very excited too.
And they're going to go into this season of preparation over this week, prayer and fasting. How would you ask our congregation to pray for these men as they prepare to become deacons?
Yeah, this gives me goosebumps thinking about this, because it's one of these situations where if you're a Christian and you're a believer, you believe that spiritual warfare is a very real thing. And I think all of our church leaders, our pastors, especially, and then of course any leaders and deacons, when they come along and they say they're going to serve and they're going to do this thing, Satan, for lack of any better word, comes along and he wants to attack that spiritually. And I would ask that our congregation pray for these men, for their protection in spiritual warfare as they engage for Christ.
How many of you all, like Brian, can say, man, I had these leaders that impacted me for good. I had these leaders who impacted me and it wasn't a good impact. You know, you've had that same moment, haven't you? And what's the difference maker between those who impacted people for good and those who impact people negatively? I would submit that the key difference between the two is that those people who impact you negatively tend to be pursuing leadership for their own gain, for their own benefit. The people that impacted you positively for leadership are those who recognize there is a grander vision, a greater virtue, something beyond them that they must strive for. And within the context of the Church of Jesus Christ, that greater thing is Jesus himself, isn't it? And so a leader in church, a pastor, a group leader, any deacon, any leader that really impacts you positively within the context of the church is someone who can help lead the church or is leading the church to reflect Jesus Christ clearly and boldly to the community that we find ourselves in. And so when you come to this little letter of Titus, Paul is this church leader. He's well known, he's well established, he's brilliant, he's planted churches all over the Roman Empire, and he's writing this letter to this young guy named Titus, and Titus is a Greek guy. He's in a Jewish world. Most people in the Church of Jesus Christ are Jews at this time. He's like a double outsider. He's not Jewish, he's not Cretan, and so here he is, he shows up in this island, and it's his job to come in here and fix this busted up church with a lot of dysfunctional leadership. Sound easy to you? Nope. Look at verse 5. The reason I left you in Crete was to set right what was left undone, as I directed you to appoint elders in every town. There's a good number of bad leaders that have emerged in this church, and Titus's job is to set the situation straight. So Paul says, okay, Titus, the kinds of pastors that you want to see in place are these people of unbelievable integrity. And then he's going to go down this long laundry list, this checklist of what their integrity ought to include. He starts off, for example, must be the husband of one wife. He says, listen, this is the kind of person that you're looking for. You're looking for a pastor who's involved in a marriage that, man, they are in it for the long haul. And then let's talk about the way they conduct themselves in business, within the household of God and beyond. You're looking for people who are honest, who are blameless, who are not hot-tempered. They're not given to addiction. They're not excessive drinkers. They're not a bully. They're not greedy for money. They're hospitable. They're compassionate. These are the kinds of people that you're looking for to serve at the highest levels inside the church. And they're to be the kind of people who will also come along and teach the Bible with great accuracy. And when the church has those kinds of leaders, it's going to be able to accurately reflect the image of Christ to everybody who looks in it. So as you think about leaders in the context of the church, what do you do with this? Let me just give you a couple of ideas. One, I would like to ask that throughout the course of this week and beyond, but throughout the course of this week at the very least, each of you all take up the commitment to pray for your pastors every single day. Second thing, and this one's hard, this one's really hard, okay? So stay with me. I'd like to ask that you make a commitment beginning this week that you will not disqualify yourself from leadership. Third challenge that I want to give to you this week is this. If you're not involved in leading something for the cause of Christ, step up. Step into something. Don't be content to do nothing. Why? Because the church of Jesus Christ needs leaders who help tilt it in such a way that it's a perfect reflection of Jesus Christ that can be seen by the community. And your pastors need to lead in that. And you've got a role to play in that. And I'm just asking that as your pastors and as a congregation, we agree to meet in the middle, right? And that we all determine to keep ourselves qualified. And that we all agree that we're going to take on ownership and corporate responsibility to reflect the love of Jesus Christ clearly to our community. Can we do that?